The courtroom was full of people, yet the air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Everyone was watching the young millionaire, a man who had once been admired for his wealth, kindness, and confidence. Now he sat at the defendant's table, his head low, his eyes filled with fear. The case against him was strong, or at least it seemed that way. Powerful enemies had worked in the shadows to trap him. And the only person who was supposed to stand by him, his lawyer, was nowhere near loyal. The lawyer, dressed in an expensive suit, stood before the judge. His voice was calm, but his words cut like a knife. Instead of defending his client, he spoke with hesitation, with half-truths, and with a lack of conviction. The millionaire's heart sank as he realized something terrible. The man he trusted with his life was betraying him. He could feel the eyes of the crowd burning into him, some filled with pity, others with judgment. He was young, rich, and alone. When the judge asked for the lawyer's final statement, the betrayal became clear. The lawyer shook his head and said, "I can no longer represent this man." His words echoed through the room like thunder. Gasps filled the air. The audience leaned forward, some whispering, others covering their mouths in shock. The millionaire's face turned pale. The ground beneath him seemed to vanish. He looked at the lawyer with desperate eyes, silently asking why. But the lawyer avoided his gaze. Money, power, and influence had bought his silence. It wasn't loyalty or justice that guided him, but fear and greed. He packed up his papers, closed his briefcase, and walked away without turning back. The millionaire sat frozen, unable to breathe. A storm of emotions raged inside him: anger, sadness, and disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought of what was to come. Without a lawyer, his chances were gone. Without someone to speak for him, he was doomed. His enemies had already arranged everything. The lawyer's betrayal was the final blow. The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised but unwilling to intervene. The system was cold, and it had no room for mercy. The millionaire was left exposed, defenseless, and weak in front of people who wanted to see him fall. The audience stared at him like vultures waiting for their prey to collapse. In the back of the courtroom, whispers grew louder. Some people mocked him, saying he deserved it. Others were curious to see how far he would fall. His so-called friends were not there. His family, once proud of his success, kept their distance. Everyone he thought he could count on was gone. And now, at the moment he needed someone the most, he had been left completely alone. His throat was dry, his hands trembled, and his thoughts spun in circles. Why me? Why now? How could the man I trusted betray me in front of everyone? These questions burned in his mind, but no answers came. All he could hear was the echo of the lawyer's words, cold, final, and cruel. The millionaire tried to speak, but no words left his lips. Fear chained his voice. The silence was unbearable. Even the sound of papers shuffling or people whispering felt louder than thunder. The judge cleared his throat and looked down at him as if waiting for something. But what could he say? Who would believe him now? Without a lawyer, his words would be nothing more than cries in the wind. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on his chest. He thought of the people who had once cheered for him, the business partners who praised him, the strangers who admired his success. Where were they now? Gone. All gone. And in their place was a crowd hungry for his downfall. His enemies smiled silently. To them, this was victory. They had not only trapped him, but had stripped him of his last hope. The lawyer walking away was proof that money and influence could bend even the strongest of men. The young millionaire was no longer a powerful figure, he was just a target. Waiting to be crushed for a moment, he felt darkness close in. He saw the end of everything: his reputation destroyed, his wealth taken, his freedom stolen. He felt like a man drowning in an endless sea, struggling for air but finding none. The betrayal hurt more than the accusations. The knife in his back came not from his enemies, but from the man he trusted most. The audience thought they were watching the fall of a rich man. But what they were truly seeing was something deeper: the breaking of a spirit, the collapse of trust, and the cruel reality of betrayal. The silence in the room was no longer ordinary silence. It was a silence of judgment, the silence of defeat, and the silence of a man left completely alone. But somewhere, deep inside that silence, something unexpected was about to happen. The young millionaire did not know it yet, but fate was preparing to bring him the most unlikely protector. A voice too small to be noticed was about to rise above the noise. A voice that would change everything. The courtroom was filled with silence after the lawyer walked out. It was the kind of silence that made every breath feel heavy, every sound feel louder than it really was. The young millionaire sat there, frozen, broken by the betrayal. People whispered around him, some laughing quietly, others shaking their heads. To them, this was the end of him. No lawyer, no defense, no chance. But then, from the very back of the room, something unexpected happened. A small voice broke through the tension like a spark in the dark. "I can protect him." At first, no one believed what they heard. Heads turned, faces twisted in confusion. Who had spoken such bold words? And why, in this serious place where adults failed, would anyone say something so impossible? The sound came again, louder this time. "I can protect him." And then they saw her. It was a little girl no more than 8 years old. She stood up on the wooden bench, her tiny hands clenched into fists, her eyes shining with fire. Her clothes were old, patched in several places, and her shoes looked like they had been worn down by years of walking. She looked fragile, thin, like someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. Yet the strength in her voice was undeniable. The crowd gasped. Some people laughed, thinking it was childish nonsense. "A little girl?" someone whispered. "She must be out of her mind." Others frowned, wondering if this was some kind of trick. But the girl didn't waver. She kept her chin high, her voice steady. The millionaire lifted his head slowly, his tear-filled eyes searching for the source of the words. When he saw her, his heart skipped a beat. He recognized her face. Though years had passed since he last saw it, it was the same girl he had once helped without expecting anything in return. Years ago, he had seen her and her mother sitting outside a grocery store, cold and hungry. Without saying much, he had bought them food, warm clothes, and a small blanket. To him, it was just kindness, a passing moment. To her, it was everything. And now, she was here, standing in front of everyone, ready to defend him when no one else dared. The judge looked at her, clearly annoyed. "Sit down, child. This is no place for you." His voice was stern, but the girl didn't move. "No." She shouted, surprising everyone. "He is not alone. I will protect him." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some were angry at her defiance. Others were curious. Cameras clicked as journalists quickly pointed, their lenses at the small figure who dared to challenge the court. Her voice shook slightly. But her eyes didn't. "You all want to hurt him, but I know the truth. He is not bad. He is kind. He helped me when nobody else cared. He gave me food when I was starving. He gave me hope when the world forgot me. And now you all want to leave him alone." Every word struck harder than a hammer. The millionaire felt his chest tighten. He hadn't expected this. Out of all the people in the world, this little girl was the one to stand up for him. And she was doing it with more courage than any adult ever had. The judge tried again to silence her. But the courtroom was no longer under his control. All eyes were on the girl. Even the people who had come to see the young man fall now sat quietly, caught between disbelief and admiration, She stepped forward, her tiny feet echoing on the wooden floor. Her voice carried across the room. "You think he is guilty because his lawyer left? But I saw what happened. I saw the people who made plans against him. They want to take everything from him, just like they took everything from me. But I will not let them win. I will protect him." The silence that followed was powerful. No one laughed now. The weight of her words sank deep into the hearts of those listening. Even the millionaire's enemies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The innocence of a child had pierced through their carefully built lies. The millionaire felt something change inside him. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. He had been abandoned by lawyers, friends, and even family. But this little girl, this child who had nothing, was standing stronger than all of them combined. Tears welled in his eyes. But he did not bow his head this time. He looked straight at her, silently promising that her courage would not be wasted. The room was no longer the same. The betrayal still hung in the air, but now it was mixed with something else: wonder, curiosity, and the beginning of doubt. If a child was willing to risk everything for him, maybe there was more to his story than people believed. Maybe he wasn't the villain they thought he was. The little girl stood tall, her voice echoing in every corner of the room. "I can protect him." And with those words, the tide began to turn. The courtroom was still buzzing after the little girl's bold words. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Cameras clicked, and the crowd could not stop whispering. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward as if they didn't want to miss a single word. The young millionaire sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the child who had dared to stand where everyone else had abandoned him. Who was this girl? Why was she so determined? These questions spread through the room like wildfire. At first, people thought it was nothing more than a child's foolishness. But then, slowly, the truth began to surface. One woman in the audience suddenly recognized her. She leaned closer to the person beside her and whispered, "I know that girl. She's the one who used to beg outside the train station. Her family was so poor, they had nothing." Others nodded, realizing they had seen her before, sitting in the cold with her mother. Too weak even to cry, the young millionaire knew exactly who she was. His heart tightened as memories rushed back. Years ago, when he was still building his fortune, he had stumbled upon her and her mother one winter night. They were sitting on the pavement, shivering, their faces pale from hunger. Passers-by ignored them, some even looked at them with disgust. But he had stopped. He remembered kneeling down and asking her name. Her voice had been faint, but her eyes were the same as now, burning with silent strength. Without hesitation, he had bought them hot food from a nearby shop, blankets to keep them warm, and a small bag of groceries that could last for days. He had even handed the girl a pair of shoes that belonged to his late sister, making sure they fit just right. To him, it was a small act of kindness, something he forgot about quickly in the rush of his busy life. But to her, it was a miracle. That night had changed her life. For the first time, she and her mother had slept without hunger clawing at their stomachs. For the first time, she had felt seen not as a burden, not as trash on the street, but as a human being who mattered. And now, years later, she had not forgotten. While the world turned its back on him, she stepped forward. She owed him nothing, yet she gave him everything. She had her courage, her voice, her loyalty. The crowd began to realize this was not just a child's outburst. This was the return of kindness, a repayment of a debt only her heart understood. Reporters started typing faster, sensing this story was bigger than a courtroom drama. It was about humanity, loyalty, and the strange way life brought people together again. The girl raised her small chin and spoke louder, this time with the weight of memory. "He once saved me when I had no one. He gave me food when I was starving. He gave me clothes when I was freezing. And now You want me to sit quietly while everyone lies about him? No, I cannot forget what he did for me. I will protect him, just like he protected me." Her words struck the millionaire's heart like lightning. He could barely believe it. In his darkest hour, when all his wealth and power had crumbled, the only one who came forward was an 8-year-old child he had once helped on the street. The judge frowned, trying to keep order, but even he could not ignore the impact. The atmosphere of the courtroom had shifted. The enemies of the young millionaire, who had been smiling a moment ago, now shifted uneasily in their seats. Their plan had been perfect: destroy his reputation, strip away his allies, and leave him alone. But they had not expected this. They had not expected a child to rise like a shield in front of him. The millionaire felt something stir inside him that he thought was lost hope. He lifted his head higher, his eyes no longer filled with despair but with gratitude. For the first time since the trial began, he felt less alone. The girl's story began to spread beyond the walls of the courtroom. Journalists rushed to share it with the world. The poor child who stood for the millionaire read the first headlines that appeared online. People across the city started talking. Some were skeptical, others were moved, but everyone was curious. Why would a child with nothing to gain risk everything to defend him? The answer was simple: kindness never dies. A single act of compassion years ago had grown into unshakable loyalty. The young millionaire had planted a seed without realizing it. And now, in his hour of need, that seed had become his shield. As the crowd stared at the girl, the young millionaire realized something powerful. His fortune, his businesses, his lawyers, and even his so-called friends had all failed him. But the simple act of giving bread, warmth, and shoes to a starving child had returned to him like a gift from destiny. The little girl's voice echoed again, strong and fearless. "He once gave me hope when I had none. Now I will be his hope when he has none." The courtroom fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of awe. Something bigger than money, bigger than power, had entered the room. And it came from the heart of a child who refused to forget. Kindness. The room was still heavy with silence after the girl's brave declaration. People stared at her as if she had pulled light into a place filled with shadows. The young millionaire, once looking broken, now sat straighter in his chair, his eyes fixed on her as if she were the last rope keeping him from sinking. But then, something happened that no one expected. The little girl took another step forward. Her voice was small, but carried a strange force, a force that made people listen. "You think he is guilty," she said, her words trembling at first. "But I saw the truth. I know who is behind this. They are the ones who should be sitting there, not him." The audience gasped. The judge's eyes narrowed. Reporters leaned so far forward, their pens nearly slipped from their hands. Was this child really about to reveal something the lawyers and investigators had ignored? The girl's lips trembled, but she spoke anyway. "I saw them. I saw men come to our street at night. They spoke of him, of how they would bring him down. They said they would make people believe he was guilty, even if he was innocent. They laughed about it. They said money could buy lies, and lies could destroy anyone." The courtroom exploded with whispers. Some people called her a liar. Others sat stunned. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. But the words had already spread like fire. The young millionaire's heart pounded. He had suspected betrayal, but hearing it from her lips made everything clear. Someone had planned this. Someone powerful had woven a web of lies so carefully that even the court had believed them. And this child, this tiny, fragile child, was now pulling the web apart thread by thread. She went on, her small fists clenched tight. They didn't care about truth. They only cared about money. They said if the lawyer refused to defend him, everyone would think he was guilty. And now you see, the lawyer is gone. just like they planned. The millionaire closed his eyes for a moment. She was right. It explained everything: the sudden weakness in his lawyer's defense, the cold way he had walked away, the smirks on his enemies' faces. It was not a case of bad luck. It was a conspiracy. The enemies in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, fear flickered across their faces. They had not counted on this. They thought their secrets were buried in the dark. They had not expected an innocent child standing at the edge of the street to overhear them. The judge leaned forward. "Child, do you understand the seriousness of what you are saying?" His voice was stern, but beneath it, even he sounded shaken. The girl nodded firmly. "Yes, I understand. But what is serious is the truth. He did nothing wrong. I saw the ones who did." The audience was no longer mocking her. Many sat frozen, staring as if a veil had been lifted. Some began whispering to each other, what if she was telling the truth? What if this young millionaire really was innocent and everything they believed was a lie? Reporters' fingers moved furiously over their keyboards. Headlines were already forming. Child exposes secret plot in courtroom drama. Millionaire's trial turns as little girl speaks truth. The millionaire's enemies glared at the girl, their faces dark with anger. But she did not lower her eyes. She stood her ground, small but unshaken, as if she knew that this was her purpose. The young millionaire felt tears sting his eyes. He wanted to shout, to tell her to stop before they hurt her, but he could not. His voice was gone, his throat choked with emotion. All he could do was watch her carry the weight that should have been his. Every word she spoke was like a hammer, breaking the walls around him. Lies that had trapped him were crumbling. For the first time, the truth was being heard. And it wasn't coming from lawyers or powerful men, it was coming from the smallest voice in the room. The girl's voice grew stronger, steadier. "You can take away his lawyer, you can spread lies, but you cannot hide the truth. I saw what you did, and I will not stay silent. I will protect him." The room fell into a strange silence. Not the silence of defeat this time, but of disbelief. People had come expecting to watch a rich man fall. But what they saw instead was a child tearing open the darkness with words sharper than any. Lawyers' arguments. The young millionaire looked at her and whispered, though no one else could hear, "Thank you." His voice broke, but his eyes glowed with something that had been missing for so long: hope. The girl stood tall, her chest rising and falling quickly, her face flushed with emotion. She had no wealth, no power, no title. But at that moment, she carried more weight than anyone else in the courtroom. The truth was out, and it was heavy. Heavy enough to make the guilty tremble, and strong enough to give the innocent another chance to fight. The courtroom had never seen anything like it. The little girl's words still echoed in the air, her small voice carrying more power than all the lawyers who had stood there before. Reporters rushed to the exits, calling their editors, their faces pale with shock but glowing with excitement. Something extraordinary had just happened, and the world outside was about to hear it. By evening, the story had spread beyond the walls of the court, on television screens, in newspapers, and across social media. One headline dominated: 8-year-old girl defends young millionaire after a lawyer walks out. Clips of her standing with fiery eyes, declaring, "I can protect him," played again and again. People who had never cared about the trial suddenly leaned forward, watching with fascination. At first, the reactions were mixed. Some people scoffed. "What can a child know about law or truth?" they said. But others felt their hearts stir. They had grown tired of corruption, tired of watching the powerful crush the weak. The courage of a poor child standing up for a man everyone had abandoned struck a chord deep inside them. By the next morning, crowds had begun to gather outside the courthouse. Some held signs that read, "Justice for the innocent." Others carried pictures of the girl, calling her the voice of truth. The same people who once thought the young millionaire guilty now hesitated. They asked themselves, if a child believes in him so strongly, could he really be guilty? Inside the millionaire's prison cell, he saw the news for the first time. The little girl's face was on every screen. Her words had become a storm, sweeping across the city, shaking even those who once mocked him. For days he had felt forgotten, betrayed, and alone. Now he realized something powerful: he was not alone anymore. The girl herself was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Cameras followed her when she walked with her mother. Journalists begged her for interviews. But she stayed humble, speaking in the same simple way she had in the courtroom. "I only told the truth," she said. "He once helped me, so now I will help him." Her honesty melted people's hearts. Unlike adults who often twisted their words, she spoke with innocence and courage. Every sentence she spoke spread like fire on the internet, gaining millions of views. She became a symbol, a reminder that truth could come from even the smallest, poorest person. Meanwhile, the enemies of the young millionaire began to panic. They had thought the trial would be quick and easy. They had arranged the betrayal, silenced the lawyer, and made sure lies filled every report. But they had not expected this: a child exposing their plot in front of the whole world. Their carefully built wall of lies was starting to crumble, brick by brick. The public began demanding answers. People gathered in the streets, chanting for justice. Talk shows invited experts, and many admitted that the case now looked suspicious. Why would a child risk everything if she wasn't telling the truth? They asked. What would she gain by standing up for a man everyone had already condemned? The millionaire sat in his cell, tears in his eyes, watching the world slowly shift in his favor. He had once thought his fortune was his greatest strength, but now he realized the truth. His real strength came from kindness. The small act of helping a child years ago had returned to him in a way he never imagined. One evening, as the sun set behind the city, thousands of people stood outside the courthouse holding candles. They were not there for the millionaire's wealth or status. They were there because a child's courage had awakened something in them, something they had almost forgotten. The belief that truth and loyalty still mattered. The crowd chanted her words, "I can protect him. I can protect him." Their voices shook the streets, echoing like thunder. The millionaire, hearing their chants through the barred window of his cell, felt a strength he had not felt in months. Hope returned to his heart like a flame refusing to die. The girl, standing at the front of the crowd with her small candle, looked up at the courthouse windows. She did not flinch at the cameras or the noise. She held her light high, her tiny figure glowing in the dark. To the world, she was no longer just a poor child. She was a warrior of truth, a symbol of innocence rising against corruption. The enemies inside the court could feel the ground slipping beneath their feet. The lies they had built no longer seemed strong enough to hold back the tide. The girl's courage had started something they could not control. The public had awakened, and once people awaken, nothing can silence them again. The chants outside the courthouse grew louder with each passing day. What began as a handful of people holding candles had now turned into thousands, filling the streets with their voices. They weren't shouting for wealth, nor were they moved by power. They were moved by the courage of a child who refused to be silenced. Her words had shaken the system, and now the system had no choice but to respond. Under this pressure, the judge ordered the case to be re-examined. At first, the enemies of the young millionaire scoffed. They had wealth, connections, and years of influence. They believed the firestorm outside would soon fade. But they were wrong. The more they tried to hide, the brighter the flames of truth grew. Investigators began to dig deeper. At first, the files looked clean, polished, and perfect, as if the millionaire was guilty beyond doubt. But cracks appeared quickly. Witnesses who had once been silent now came forward, inspired by the girl's bravery. They admitted they had been bribed. Others confessed they had been threatened. Documents surfaced, revealing that the lawyer who walked away had been pressured. His silence bought at a heavy price. Each new discovery was like a hammer striking at the lies that had chained the millionaire. One by one, the pieces of the puzzle came together, revealing the conspiracy in full view. The girl was called again to speak, not just in court, but before investigators. Despite her small frame, she sat firmly in the chair, her voice steady as she repeated what she had heard that night on the street. They said they would destroy him with lies. They said no one would stand by him. But I stood. And now you all know the truth. Her testimony shook even the hardest of hearts. Reporters captured every word, and her courage inspired even more people to come forward. Soon, names were named. The faces of those who plotted in the dark now came into the light, their secrets spilling into the open. The young millionaire sat in court as these revelations were read aloud. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from relief. For so long, he had lived under a cloud of betrayal. Now the storm was breaking, and rays of truth were piercing through. He turned his eyes toward the girl, who sat quietly with her mother, and whispered in his heart, "You saved me." The enemies tried to fight back. They hired new lawyers. They twisted their words. They blamed each other. But the tide had already turned. The public no longer believed them. The people who once cheered for their wealth now spat at their corruption. Every move they made only revealed more of their guilt. Finally, the corrupt lawyer who had abandoned the millionaire was forced to face questions. Cornered by the evidence, his pride crumbled. He admitted that he had been paid to walk away, that fear and greed had tied his hands. The courtroom erupted in anger. People shouted, their fury spilling like fire. The betrayal that had once broken the young millionaire now returned to destroy the betrayers. The judge's face grew stern. This case has gone beyond a trial. It has revealed a sickness in our system. But the truth, carried by the courage of one child, has set things right. His words rang heavy, but they carried hope. The young millionaire felt tears streaming down his face. For the first time in months, he was not ashamed to cry. He was free not only because the lies were falling apart, but because someone had believed in him when no one else would. The girl looked at him and smiled, her tiny face glowing with innocence. To her, it wasn't about fame or headlines. She had done what she felt was right. She had carried the truth when everyone else dropped it. The world outside exploded with celebration. Crowds chanted his name, but even more, they chanted hers. She had become a hero, not because of power, but because of her heart. She was proof that courage did not need age, wealth, or titles. For the enemies, the turning point was their downfall. For the young millionaire, it was his rebirth. And for the little girl, it was the moment she showed the world that even the smallest hands could carry the weight of. Justice. The trial that once seemed hopeless had transformed into something greater, a story that would be told for generations. The truth had finally won. The trial had ended, but the story did not stop there. The young millionaire walked out of the courthouse, free at last, his name cleared, his enemies exposed. The crowd outside roared with joy, but their cheers were not only for him. They shouted another name louder, a name that had already become a symbol. The little girl who had stood up and said, "I can protect him." She was only 8 years old, yet her words had shaken the pillars of corruption. Reporters chased her, cameras flashed around her, and people reached out to touch her hand as if she carried a piece of truth itself. But she stayed the same, a poor child with patched clothes and eyes that still carried both innocence and strength. Fame did not touch her heart. She did not want wealth or attention. She only wanted justice for the man who had once given her bread. When she was hungry, the young millionaire looked at her in the middle of the crowd. For a moment, he felt smaller than she was. All his riches, his power, his influence, none of it had saved him. But this child, with nothing in her pockets, had given him back his life. He walked toward her, bent down, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You saved me," he said softly, his voice trembling. The girl shook her head. "You saved me first." Those simple words carried more weight than gold. Around them, the crowd grew silent, listening to the exchange. Some wiped their eyes, others clutched their children's hands tighter. They realized they were not just witnessing the end of a trial. They were witnessing the birth of a bond that went beyond law, beyond society, beyond anything ordinary in the days that followed. The millionaire made a promise to himself. He would not let the girl live in poverty again. He arranged for her and her mother to move into a safe home, warm and filled with food. He enrolled her in school, gave her books, and made sure she would never have to beg on the streets again. To him, she was no longer just the child he once helped. She was family, but it was not only her life that changed. The story spread far beyond the city. Newspapers around the world wrote about the child who protected a millionaire. People in distant countries watched videos of her standing bravely in court. She became a reminder that truth did not always need strength, but courage. That loyalty could be stronger than betrayal, that even a small voice could echo louder than thunder. For the young millionaire, life was never the same again. He rebuilt his businesses, but with new values. He no longer chased wealth for pride. Instead, he used his power to protect others, to give opportunities to those who had none. He often told people, "I was saved by a child." If she can stand for truth, then so can we. Years later, the little girl grew into a strong young woman. Her name was remembered not as someone poor and forgotten, but as someone who once carried the weight of justice on her tiny shoulders. Wherever she went, people treated her with respect, not because of her fame, but because of her courage. The bond between her and the millionaire only grew deeper. He became her guardian, her teacher, her second family. And she became his reminder that kindness never dies. Whenever he felt the weight of the world press down on him again, he remembered the moment her small voice rose above the courtroom silence. Whenever she doubted herself, he reminded her that she once stood against the powerful and won. Together, they proved something timeless. Money can buy silence, but it cannot buy loyalty. Power can bend people, but it cannot crush the truth forever. And sometimes, the smallest heart carries the greatest strength. People still tell their story, even after many years. Parents tell their children about the poor girl who stood up for the rich man. Not because she wanted anything, but because it was right. Teachers tell their students that courage does not wait for age or strength. Journalists write about it as one of the most powerful courtroom moments in history. And whenever the girl, now a woman, looks back on that day, she smiles. Not because of the fame, not because of the attention, but because she knows one thing for certain. Her voice mattered. The young millionaire often said, "I once thought my wealth was my shield. But my true shield was her voice. And that voice saved me." Their story became a legacy of courage. Loyalty and the kind of love that comes not from blood or contracts, but from humanity itself. And so, the words that once shook a courtroom continue to echo through time. I can protect him. The trial was over. Justice had been served. The little girl had become a hero, and the young millionaire had been restored. For most stories, this would have been the ending. But in truth, it was only the beginning. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle. The city returned to its daily rhythm, but the echoes of that courtroom moment never truly faded. People still spoke of the girl who had stood tall when the world turned its back. Children in schools whispered her words as if they were a spell. I can protect him. And those words became something more than a memory. They became a movement. It started small. Teachers used her story to remind students that courage was not about size, wealth, or age. Then, community groups began quoting her in meetings. Soon, even leaders and activists began to hold up her example. If a poor 8-year-old girl can fight for justice, they said, then what excuse do we have? The young millionaire watched all of this unfold with awe. He had expected his story to fade once the case ended. But he realized something greater had happened. Her courage had not only saved him, it had awakened others. It had sparked a fire that refused to die. One day, he invited the girl and her mother to his office. He showed her the letters that had been arriving daily. They came from all over the world, handwritten notes, emails, drawings from children. One little boy from another country had written, "I was afraid to speak when someone was bullied. But then, I read about you. If you can be brave, so can I." The girl read the letter silently, her eyes wide. She never thought her voice would travel so far. To her, it had been simple. She saw the truth, and she spoke it. But to others, it was everything. The millionaire looked at her and said, "You gave me back my life. Now, let's give others hope." Together, they started something new. A foundation not for profit, not for power, but for courage. They built schools in poor neighborhoods, created shelters for children like her, and opened doors for voices that were too often ignored. The foundation carried her name, though she always insisted it was his idea. But the millionaire knew the truth. It was born from her words. Her strength, her fire. As years passed, the little girl grew older. She studied with passion, knowing that her education was not just for herself, but for the many who looked up to her. And wherever she went, so she carried the memory of that day in court, the day she became more than just a child. The young millionaire, too, was forever changed. Wealth no longer defined him. What defined him was loyalty, kindness, and the bond with the girl who had stood by him. He became a protector of children, of the poor, of the voiceless. People began to say, he was once saved by a child, and now he saves the world's children. But beyond fame, beyond movements, beyond the headlines, there was something deeper, the bond between them. He treated her not as someone he owed, but as family. She, in return, never forgot the night he had once saved her with food and kindness. Their lives were tied together by threads of compassion, stronger than blood or fortune. Years later, when people looked back on the case, they no longer called it just a trial. They called it the turning of voices. For it was the moment when one child reminded the world that even in a society filled with lies and corruption, truth could rise from the most unexpected place. And even when time passed, even when new generations were born, her story lived on. In classrooms, in homes, in quiet whispers at bedtime. Parents told their children, once a little girl stood in a courtroom and protected a man no one else would protect. And because of her, the truth won. The girl, now a woman, sometimes sat by her window at night, remembering that moment when she had shouted with all her strength. She would smile, not out of pride, but out of peace. She had learned that courage is not something you wait for. It is something you give, even when you are small, even when you are afraid. And the young millionaire, now older, would often say to his friends, "My wealth once made people bow. But it was not my riches that saved me. It was her voice, a voice so small that the world almost ignored it. But it was that voice that carried me through the storm." So the story did not end with victory in court. It grew, it spread, and it became a light in places where hope was lost. And still, after all the years, the words that began it all continued to echo in the hearts of millions. I can protect him.